The house had always been my sanctuary. Not just a place, but a living, breathing entity woven into the fabric of my existence. It stood on a quiet, tree-lined street, a two-story Victorian with a wraparound porch, and a turret that always felt a little too grand for our modest lives. My parents bought it when I was 5, and for the next 25 years, it had been the backdrop to every memory, every milestone, every quiet moment of peace. Its walls had absorbed laughter, tears, whispered secrets, and the comforting hum of everyday life. I was Sarah, and this was my home. After my parents passed, the house became mine. It wasn't a burden, it was a legacy, a comforting weight that settled around me like a familiar blanket. I loved its quirks. The creaky floorboard on the third step of the main staircase, the way the morning sun hit the stained glass window in the foyer just right, painting the hall in jewel tones, the faint scent of old wood and forgotten spices that clung to the air in the pantry. It was old, yes, but it was my old. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I worked from home, a freelance graphic designer, which meant my days were spent largely within these familiar walls. My routine was simple. Coffee on the porch, work in the sunlit study, a walk around the garden in the afternoon, dinner in the cozy kitchen, and evenings curled up with a book in the living room. The silence of the house, once filled with the gentle presence of my parents, was now a comforting companion, punctuated only by the distant chirping of crickets or the rustle of leaves outside. It started subtly, so subtly, that I dismissed it as my imagination or perhaps the inevitable settling of an old house. The first time, I was in the kitchen, washing dishes. I heard a faint thump from upstairs. It wasn't loud enough to be something falling, more like a heavy book being placed on a carpeted floor. I paused, listening. Nothing. I shrugged, attributing it to the house's old pipes, or maybe a branch hitting the roof. A few days later, it happened again. I was reading in the living room, lost in a particularly gripping novel. A distinct click echoed from the hallway. It sounded like the latch on the front door. My heart gave a little jump. I lived alone, and I hadn't been expecting anyone. I got up, walked to the hallway, and peered at the door. It was firmly shut, the deadbolt engaged. I even tried the knob just to be sure. Locked. I told myself it was the house settling, the old wood expanding or contracting. Old houses made noises. It was normal. Then came the misplaced objects. My car keys, which I always left on the small antique table by the front door, were suddenly on the kitchen counter. I remembered putting them down, the jingle of the metal against the wood. I distinctly remembered it. But there they were, next to the fruit bowl. I chucked it up to distraction, a momentary lapse. "Sarah, you're getting forgetful," I muttered to myself, even though I prided myself on my meticulous habits.
The next time, it was my favorite mug. I'd used it for my morning tea, rinsed it, and left it on the drying rack. When I went to put it away later, it wasn't there. I searched the entire kitchen, then the living room, even the study. Nothing. I sighed, frustrated. Had I put it in the dishwasher? No, it was empty. I gave up, grabbed another mug, and tried to forget about it. The next morning, there it was, sitting perfectly clean and dry on the kitchen table, right where I'd had breakfast. I stared at it, a prickle of unease starting to form on my skin. It wasn't just misplaced, it was returned. The sounds began to evolve. The gentle thumps and clicks gave way to something more distinct. One evening, as dusk bled through the windows, I heard what sounded like a faint whisper from the top of the stairs. It was too indistinct to make out words, just a soft, sibilant murmur, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I froze, my hand hovering over the light switch. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and small in the growing gloom. Silence. I flicked on the light, bathing the staircase in a warm glow. Nothing. Just the familiar banister, the worn carpet. I started to feel watched, not in a menacing way, not at first. More like a subtle awareness, a feeling that I wasn't entirely alone. When I walked from one room to another, I'd catch glimpses of shadows at the edge of my vision just as I turned my head. A flicker of movement in the reflection of a window, gone before I could focus. I'd spin around, but there would be nothing there. Just the empty room, the familiar furniture, the quiet. Sleep became more difficult. I'd wake in the dead of night, a profound sense of cold pressing down on me, even though it was summer. The cold wasn't just on my skin, it felt like it was seeping into my bones, emanating from the very air around me. I'd pull the blankets tighter, shiver, and try to rationalize it as a draft, despite the closed windows. And sometimes, in those moments of waking dread, I would hear it, a faint, rhythmic creaking, like someone slowly rocking in an old chair, coming from downstairs. My parents' rocking chair, which sat in the living room, unused since my mother passed, its wood polished and still. I tried to tell myself I was stressed, overworked, grieving. It was natural to feel a little off, but the feeling persisted, growing like a slow spreading stain. The house, my sanctuary, was beginning to feel different. The comforting hum was now a low thrum of unease. The familiar blanket was starting to feel like a shroud. And the silence? The silence was no longer comforting. It felt expectant. One morning, I found a small antique silver locket on my bedside table. It wasn't mine. I'd never seen it before. It was tarnished, intricately engraved with a floral pattern, and felt cold to the touch. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a misplaced object. This was something new, something that had appeared from nowhere. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the cold metal. It was empty inside. No picture, no inscription, just a tiny, hollow space. I put it down quickly, as if it had burned me.
A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just an old house settling. This wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening. Something was wrong. And it was happening right here in my home. The locket was the turning point. It was tangible proof that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. I tried to think logically. Had a friend left it? No one had visited in weeks. Had it been a forgotten item from my parents' belongings? I had meticulously gone through everything, and this locket was utterly unfamiliar. I placed it carefully on the dresser, a silent challenge to whatever unseen force was at play. That night, the rocking chair downstairs wasn't just creaking, it was rocking with a distinct, deliberate rhythm. Creak, pause, creak, pause. It was slow, steady, like someone was sitting in it, gently swaying back and forth. I lay in bed, rigid with fear, my eyes wide open in the darkness. The sound was too clear, too consistent to be a draft or the house settling. It was a presence. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs felt heavy, paralyzed by a terror I had never known. I squeezed my eyes shut, pulling the covers over my head, praying for morning. Morning eventually came, bringing with it the blessed light, but no relief. The rocking chair was still, the locket was still on the dresser, but the air in the house felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension. I found myself walking on tiptoes, speaking in whispers, as if afraid to disturb whatever was listening. I started to research old houses, strange occurrences, paranormal activity. My rational mind screamed at me, but the fear was a cold hand gripping my throat. I devoured articles, forums, even dusty old books from the local library about local folklore. Most of it was sensationalized nonsense, but a few patterns emerged. Cold spots, misplaced objects, disembodied sounds, feelings of being watched. Every item on the list was a checkmark against my own experiences. The house began to play tricks with the lights, flickering, dimming, sometimes going out entirely for a few heart-stopping seconds before blazing back on. I checked the fuse box, called an electrician. He found nothing wrong, declared the wiring perfectly sound for an old house. "Just a quirk, ma'am," he'd said, oblivious to the dread that had taken root in my chest. One afternoon, I was in the study, trying to focus on a design project.
The air grew suddenly intensely cold, raising goosebumps on my arms. I looked up, my breath misting in front of me. The window was closed. The room was bathed in sunlight, yet the cold was bone deep. And then I smelled it. A faint, sweet, cloying scent, like lilies after they've begun to wilt. It was the scent my mother had always worn, her favorite perfume. My eyes welled up, not with grief, but with a horrifying realization. This wasn't just a presence. It was her presence, or something mimicking her. "Mom?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The cold intensified, and the scent grew stronger, almost overwhelming. I felt a pressure on my shoulder, a light touch, like hand. I spun around, tears streaming down my face, but there was nothing, just the empty space where I felt the touch. The cold receded, the scent faded, leaving me alone in the suddenly normal warmth of the room, shaking uncontrollably. I called my best friend, Emily. I tried to sound casual, but my voice cracked. "Hey, Emily. Have you ever felt like your house was haunted?" I laughed nervously, but it came out as a choked sob. Emily, bless her, didn't laugh. She listened patiently as I poured out everything. The thumps, the keys, the mug, the locket, the rocking chair, the cold, the scent. "Sarah," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you need to get out of there. Come stay with me for a few days. Clear your head." I wanted to. Oh, how I wanted to. But a strange, stubborn defiance had begun to grow within me. This was my home, my parents' home. I couldn't just abandon it. And a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand was gnawing at me. What was happening? Why now? "No," I said, surprising even myself. "No, I can't. I need to figure this out." Emily argued, pleaded, but I was resolute. I hung up feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. I was no longer a passive observer. I was going to confront this. That night, I decided to stay awake. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, armed myself with my phone, and settled into the living room, directly facing the rocking chair. The house was silent, a watchful, waiting silence. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, each second stretching into an eternity. Around midnight, the temperature dropped. The familiar bone-chilling cold began to seep into the room. I shivered, pulling a blanket tighter around me. The scent of lilies, faint at first, began to permeate the air. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. Then, the rocking chair began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it began to sway. Creak, pause, creak, pause. My eyes were fixed on it, wide with terror and a strange fascination. It wasn't rocking wildly, but gently, as if someone was indeed sitting there, lost in thought. I could almost feel the weight, the impression of a body in the empty space. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The rocking stopped. The cold intensified, becoming unbearable. The scent of lilies was now overwhelming, suffocating. And then from the empty chair, a voice, a whisper so faint it was almost a thought, yet undeniably there, echoed in the silent room. Mine. The single word, mine, hung in the air, a chilling pronouncement that solidified my worst fears. It wasn't my mother.
It was something else, something possessive and cold. A profound terror, unlike anything I had ever experienced, seized me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body remained frozen, my eyes fixed on the empty rocking chair that now seemed to pulse with an unseen energy. The cold receded as quickly as it had come, leaving behind a clammy dampness on my skin. The cloying scent of lilies vanished, replaced by the faint, familiar aroma of old wood and dust. The house returned to its usual quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a predatory quiet, the silence of a hunter waiting for its prey.
I didn't sleep that night. I sat huddled on the sofa, clutching the blanket around me, my gaze darting around the room, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. Just the familiar furniture, the shadows cast by the streetlights outside, and the oppressive weight of that single word, mine. The next morning, exhaustion gnawed at me, but a new resolve had hardened within me. I was no longer just afraid. I was angry. This was my home, not mine in the way that chilling whisper implied. I would not be driven out. I would fight for it. My research intensified. I stopped looking for generic ghost stories and started digging into the history of this house. I visited the local historical society, a dusty building filled with archives and the faint smell of aged paper. The elderly woman behind the counter, Mrs. Henderson, was a fount of local knowledge. "The old Hawthorne place, you mean?" she said, her eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. "Been there forever, seems like. Built in the late 1800s, I believe, by a Captain Elias Hawthorne. Sea captain he was." I spent hours poring over old property records, census data, and newspaper clippings. The house had changed hands several times over the decades. The Hawthornes, then the Millers, the Davies, the Changs, and finally, my parents. Nothing in the records hinted at anything unusual. No tragic deaths, no scandalous events, just mundane transfers of ownership. Until I found it. A small, faded article from 1903. "Tragedy strikes Hawthorne family." My blood ran cold. Captain Elias Hawthorne's wife, Eleanor, had died suddenly in the house. The cause was listed as consumption, a common ailment of the time, but the article mentioned her unusual decline and the captain's profound grief and reclusiveness after her passing. It also mentioned that the captain had never remarried and had died in the house himself, alone, 20 years later. Eleanor Hawthorne. Could it be her? The locket, the lilies, the rocking chair? It all started to coalesce into a terrifying picture. A woman, perhaps confined to the house by illness, who had died within its walls and whose husband had mourned her profoundly until his own death. A possessive spirit, perhaps, still clinging to what she considered hers. I went home, a new kind of dread mixing with my determination. This wasn't a random haunting. This was personal, and the mine wasn't just about the house. It was about me. The activity escalated. The sounds became louder, more aggressive. Footsteps echoed from empty rooms, heavy and deliberate, as if someone was pacing. Doors would slam shut, even when there was no breeze. Objects weren't just misplaced, they were thrown. One morning, I found a vase shattered on the kitchen floor, its ceramic shards scattered like teeth. There was no explanation. It had been sitting securely on the counter. The cold spots became more frequent, localized, and intense.
I'd walk into a room and a sudden pocket of freezing air would envelop me, making my teeth chatter. Sometimes the air would feel thick, heavy, as if I was pushing through water. And the scent of lilies, now often accompanied by a faint metallic tang, would fill the air, making my stomach churn.
Sleep was almost impossible. I'd drift off, only to be jolted awake by the feeling of being watched, or by a sudden piercing shriek that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves. My dreams were vivid, disturbing fragments. A woman in a long white dress, her face obscured, standing at the top of the stairs. A dark, swirling mass in the corner of a room, a cold, skeletal hand reaching for me. I started talking to the house, to Eleanor. "What do you want?" I'd plead, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Why are you doing this?" The only response was the intensifying cold, the slamming doors, the unsettling whispers that still eluded my understanding. One evening, I was in the living room, trying to read, when the lights flickered violently. The scent of lilies filled the air, thick and suffocating. The rocking chair began to sway, faster and faster, until it creaked and groaned under an invisible weight. Then the air around me grew impossibly cold, and the metallic tang became overwhelming. I could feel a presence right behind me, so close I could almost feel breath on my neck. A whisper, clearer this time, hissed directly into my ear, sending a jolt of pure terror through me. "You don't belong here." The whisper, "You don't belong here," was a direct assault, a declaration of war. My blood ran cold, and a primal scream caught in my throat. I sprang from the sofa, stumbling backwards, my eyes wide with a terror that bordered on madness. The air behind me still felt heavy, charged with an unseen malevolence. I could almost feel the phantom breath on my skin, even as I scrambled away. I fled the living room, not caring where I went, just needing to escape that immediate, suffocating presence. I found myself in the kitchen, leaning against the cool counter, gasping for breath, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. The lights in the living room, I noticed, had gone out completely. The house was plunging me into darkness, room by room. Panic began to set in, a cold, creeping tendril that wrapped around my sanity. I needed to get out, but the thought of leaving, of abandoning my home to this unseen entity, felt like a betrayal. And a deeper, more insidious thought whispered in my mind. Where would I go? It would follow. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my bedroom, the door locked, every light on, the locket I'd found clutched in my hand. It felt like a strange, cold anchor. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every distant groan of the pipes sounded like a deliberate movement, a step closer. I imagined Eleanor, a spectral figure pacing the halls, her eyes fixed on my door, waiting. The next day, exhaustion had transformed into a dull ache behind my eyes, but my resolve had solidified into something brittle and sharp. I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was fighting for my mind. The entity wanted me out, but it also seemed to want to torment me, to break me. I decided to search the house more thoroughly, not just for historical clues, but for anything that might be anchoring Eleanor here. I started in the attic, a forgotten space filled with dusty trunks and cobweb-draped furniture. The air was thick and still, heavy with the scent of age. I opened old boxes, sifting through my parents' forgotten mementos, but found nothing related to the Hawthornes.
Then, in a far corner, tucked behind an old wardrobe, I found a small wooden chest. It was intricately carved, dark with age, and felt surprisingly heavy. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of personal items: a delicate lace handkerchief, a dried rose, a small leather-bound journal, and another locket, identical to the one I'd found,
but this one contained a tiny sepia-toned photograph. My heart pounded. It was a woman, her face pale and drawn, but with kind eyes that seemed to hold a profound sadness. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a high-necked dark dress. Eleanor Hawthorne. I knew it instinctively. The journal, bound with a worn ribbon, felt cold beneath my fingers. I took the chest downstairs, my mind racing. This was it. This was her. I opened the journal, its pages brittle and yellowed. The handwriting was elegant, flowing, but the ink was faded, making it difficult to read. I carefully turned the pages, deciphering fragments of entries. October 1899. The cough worsens. Elias worries. This house, it feels heavy. January 1900. I am confined to my room. The doctor says it is consumption, but I feel something else, a coldness that is not of the body. April 1901. Elias brings me lilies. They are beautiful, but their scent, it reminds me of decay. I see shadows at the edges of my vision. They watch me. July 1902. The house speaks to me, whispers. It tells me I will never leave, that it is hers. My blood ran cold. That I am hers, not mine, but hers. Eleanor wasn't the one doing this. She was a victim. The true entity was something else, something that had claimed her, and now it was claiming me. The journal entries grew more frantic, more desperate. Eleanor's fear was palpable on the page. She wrote of a darkness that grew in the house, of eyes that watched her from the shadows, of a cold embrace that stole her breath. Her last entry, dated just days before her reported death, was chilling. August 15th, 1903. It is here, in the walls. It wants to keep me, forever. Elias, my love, forgive me. I cannot fight it anymore. It is consuming me. This house, it is a tomb, my tomb, and soon it will be hers. The last word, hers, was scrawled, almost illegible, as if written in a moment of extreme duress. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the journal. Eleanor wasn't the ghost. She was trapped, and the entity that trapped her was still here, still active, still hungry. A new wave of cold swept through the living room, colder than anything I had felt before. The scent of lilies returned, stronger, more putrid, mixed with that metallic tang that now made my stomach clench. The rocking chair began to move, not gently, but violently, slamming against the floorboards. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the room into near darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of my phone. From the shadows, a form began to coalesce. It wasn't Eleanor, not the spectral woman I'd seen in my dreams. This was different. A swirling mass of darkness, vaguely humanoid, but shifting, amorphous, like smoke given malevolent life. 2 pinpricks of red light, like burning embers, appeared within the swirling mass, fixing on me.
A guttural sound, a low, rasping growl filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards, through my very bones. It wasn't a whisper. It was a roar of pure, unadulterated rage. And then, the voice. Not a whisper this time, but a deep, resonant growl that echoed from every corner of the room, from the very foundations of the house. You found her. Now you join her. The words, a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate from the very foundations of the house, slammed into me like a physical blow. You found her. Now you join her. The swirling darkness solidified, becoming denser, its red eyes burning with an ancient, malevolent hunger. It was no longer amorphous. It was a towering skeletal figure, its limbs long and gaunt, its head a featureless void, save for those twin points of crimson light. It radiated an oppressive cold that made my lungs ache, and the metallic scent was now overpowering, like old blood and rust. I stumbled back, tripping over the coffee table, sending the journal and the locket skittering across the floor. My phone, still clutched in my hand, slipped and clattered, its screen cracking. The light it offered was feeble, swallowed by the encroaching shadows. The entity took a step forward, a slow, deliberate movement that seemed to consume the space around it. The floorboards groaned under its unseen weight, and a chilling wind carrying the stench of the grave swept through the room, though every window was closed. My mind screamed. This wasn't a ghost. This was something far older, far more sinister. A demon, a parasitic entity that fed on despair and trapped souls. It had consumed Eleanor, and now it wanted me. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but a flicker of defiance, born from sheer terror and a desperate will to survive, ignited within. I wouldn't go down without a fight. This was my home. My eyes darted around the dimly lit room, searching for anything, a weapon, an escape. The front door was too far, and the entity was between me and it. The windows were sealed shut. My gaze fell on the fireplace poker, a heavy iron rod leaning against the hearth. It was a desperate thought, but it was all I had. With a guttural cry, more animalistic than human, I lunged for the poker. The entity reacted, a blur of shadow, its skeletal hand reaching for me. I felt a searing cold as its fingers brushed my arm, a cold that burned like ice. I cried out, but my fingers closed around the cold metal of the poker. I swung it wildly, a desperate, clumsy arc. It passed through the entity's form, doing nothing. A low, mocking chuckle, dry and brittle like dead leaves, echoed in the room. Foolish girl, you cannot harm what you cannot touch. It advanced, its red eyes burning into my soul. I could feel its presence pressing down on me, crushing me, stealing the air from my lungs. My vision blurred, and the room began to spin. I was losing consciousness, succumbing to its power. Then, my eyes fell on the wooden chest, the one containing Eleanor's journal and the other locket. A desperate idea, a shot in the dark, flashed through my mind. If Eleanor was a victim, perhaps her essence, her trapped spirit, could be a weapon.
With a surge of adrenaline, I ignored the entity's encroaching form and scrambled toward the chest. The entity roared, a sound that ripped through the air, and a spectral hand, colder than anything, clamped onto my ankle. I cried out as the cold spread, paralyzing my leg. I fell, hitting my head on the wooden floor, stars exploding behind my eyes. But I still clutched the poker, and my free hand reached for the chest, fumbling for the journal. The entity was upon me, its dark form hovering over me, its red eyes inches from my face. I could feel its cold, foul breath on my skin, the metallic tang overwhelming. "Join us," it hissed, its voice a chorus of tortured whispers. "Join the others." "No!" I screamed, a raw, primal sound ripped from my very core. With a desperate strength I didn't know I possessed, I yanked the journal from the chest. As I did, the locket, Eleanor's locket with her photograph, fell out and landed on the floor, directly beneath the entity's swirling form. A sudden piercing shriek, unlike any I had heard, tore through the air. It wasn't from me. It was from the entity. The red eyes flickered, dimmed, and the swirling darkness recoiled as if burned. The cold lessened, just for a moment. Eleanor's locket, her image. It was a conduit, a focal point. The entity had trapped her, but perhaps her essence, her memory, was anathema to it. "Eleanor!"
I screamed, holding up the journal, though I knew she couldn't hear me. "Fight it! Fight it with me!" The entity shrieked again, a sound of pure, unadulterated pain and fury. It thrashed, its dark tendrils lashing out, but the light from the locket and Eleanor's shimmering form held it at bay. The metallic tang in the air intensified, mixed now with a smell like ozone, like something burning. I knew, instinctively, what I had to do. I had to banish it, not just from the house, but from existence. And the key was Eleanor. "You took her!" I screamed, tears streaming down my face. "Now let her go! Let us both go!" I closed my eyes, focusing all my will, all my anger, all my terror into the locket. The light intensified, blazing with a blinding white intensity. The shimmering form of Eleanor's solidified slightly, her face etched with a fierce determination. She wasn't fighting it. She was pulling at it. A silent, desperate struggle. The entity shrieked, a final, ear-splitting wail that seemed to tear the very fabric of the house. It fought, clawed, but it was being pulled, consumed by the light emanating from the locket. The swirling darkness compressed, shrinking, its red eyes shrinking with it, until they were mere pinpricks, then gone.
With a final, desperate gasp, the entity was gone, sucked into the locket, or perhaps banished to whatever hell it came from. The light from the locket faded, leaving it dull and tarnished once more. The shimmering form of Eleanor vanished, leaving only a lingering sense of peace, a gentle warmth that replaced the bone-deep cold. The house was silent, utterly, completely silent. The lights flickered back on, bathing the living room in a soft, warm glow. The rocking chair was still, no longer swaying, no longer creaking. The shattered vase on the kitchen floor was still there, a stark reminder of the terror, but the air was clear. The metallic tang, the cloying lilies, all gone. I sank to the floor, exhausted, shaking, but alive. The locket lay in my hand, heavy and inert. I opened it. Eleanor's photograph was still there, her sad eyes now seeming to hold a hint of gratitude. The house was mine again, truly mine, but it was changed. I was changed. I had faced the darkness within its walls, and I had survived. In the days that followed, the house slowly returned to normal. The cold spots vanished, the sounds ceased, the misplaced objects stopped appearing. The silence, once expectant, was now truly comforting again. I still felt a faint presence, but it was different. It was Eleanor, a gentle, protective spirit, finally at peace, watching over her home and me. I never opened the wooden chest again. I placed it back in the attic, hidden behind the wardrobe, a silent monument to the terror and the triumph. The locket, Eleanor's locket, I kept. I wore it around my neck, a constant reminder of the battle I had fought, in the bond I now shared with the house and with Eleanor. Sometimes, late at night when the house was quiet and the moon cast long shadows through the windows, I would feel a faint touch on my shoulder, a gentle, comforting presence, and I would whisper, "Thank you, Eleanor." The house was no longer just a place where I lived. It was a place where I had faced my deepest fears, where I had fought for my sanity, and where I had found an unexpected ally in a spirit trapped for over a century. It was still my sanctuary, but now it was also a testament to resilience, a silent guardian against the darkness that once lurked within its echoing walls. And I, Sarah, was finally, truly home.